So let me try and make this slightly more uncomfortable. Is India a Hindu country? And if you say India is a Hindu country, when you use the word Hindu, are you using this in a religious sense or a geographical sense, in an ethno-geographic sense or an ethno-religious sense or a civilizational sense? What is the sense in which the word Hindu is being used? That's a good point. We are forbidden from using that particular word. But somebody said that it's in all senses. Who made that statement? Great, okay. I would largely agree with you. For a different reason, because that word has acquired different meanings in different contexts, but to a very large extent, it still retains an ethno-civilizational context more than a religious context. Because until the colonials decided to craft and carve the word Hindu, we never used it to describe ourselves. The word Hindu practically did not exist except in colonial records. The word Sanatan Dharma may have existed, or you may have different names for different sampradayas, but the word Hindu is something that we never used ourselves, right? Now, in which case, if this is used in let's say in a civilizational sense, what is the character of India? Is it a nation state, or is it a civilization state? Is it a religion-based state, or is it a language-based state? This is one question that I think we have to ask ourselves. What does it effectively mean? A nation state acquires its identity on the basis of imputation of a racial identity, or a linguistic identity, or perhaps even a religious identity. But for a country like India, which has at the very least, I don't believe that our journey is only 5,000 years, I believe that we have spent at least 7,000 years, at the very least 7,000 years. Now, if that is the journey of this particular civilization, of this particular land, the concept of a nation state does not do justice to our history. Because no one religion, or no concept of Abrahamic religion, or no concept of a single language does justice to our history. For a moment, let us just assume for a moment that there is one mother language which is effectively the fount of all Indian languages. Let us assume that is the case. While that may or may not be the case, and I'm not an expert on that particular subject, let's assume that is the case for a moment. The fact remains that every language in India has at least a recorded history of 500 to 1,000 years, at the very least. Which means it has had a sufficient period of time to find its own individual expression, to evolve its own history, to evolve its own literature, to evolve its own idiom, to evolve its own syntax and grammar. Therefore, there is, let's say, a mothership, and that mothership has spawned X number of ships. But each of these ships has now acquired an identity of its own, but it still has a cultural connect to the mothership in some way or the other. That effectively captures this concept of unity in diversity, right? But the one thing that you can confidently state is that each of these thoughts and each of these expressions, no matter how individualistic they may be, are a product of this land and this soil. It has come from here. But then what is here? Are we talking about the India that has come into existence after 1947? No. The expanse of the idea of India goes beyond the geographical borders of India of 1947. If you can still find fire temples in Baku in Azerbaijan, then there is something that we don't understand yet about the expanse of the civilization. If you're still unearthing certain idols and let's say other artifacts in the Middle East, then there is something that we have still not understood of the expanse of this particular civilization. If there was a time when the emperors of Turkey were given the title Dasharatha, then there is something that we have still not understood about the expanse of this particular civilization. The emperors of Turkey were given that particular title, then there is something that we have seriously misunderstood about the history of this particular land. Therefore, what does it mean? Now that civilizational India has shrunk to political India, after multiple ravages of time and history, what exactly are you protecting then? I believe that you're fundamentally protecting one concept, and that concept is the concept of dharma. And that concept is not a religious concept. The construct of dharma is not based on religion at all, according to us, and certainly not in the Latin sense in which religion is understood. Religion comes from religio, which effectively translates to faith. We are not a faith-based system, we are a knowledge-based system. This is a society of seekers. What does it effectively translate to? It means that notwithstanding the serious diversity of thought from the north to the south to the east to the west, the one thing that is extremely common is that you choose not to impose one way of life on another way of life, and you allow that particular way of life to survive on its own. That is the concept of a sampradaya. Which means every sampradaya has a right to exist. And whoever chooses to subscribe to which sampradaya is entirely dependent on what he believes is his ideal way of achieving, let's call it liberation and not salvation. That is how we have designed our entire society. If this is the civilizational premise of this land, and this is what distinguishes us from everybody else, because I believe that every community and every religion or every country has something to offer to the pool of global thought, and this is India's contribution to the pool of global thought. Any thought process which chooses to impose itself on the land at the expense of every other culture is necessarily antithetical to the spirit of this country. That is the civilizational process. Whether it masquerades as a religion or as an ideology doesn't make a difference, because I go by the effect and the consequence of what it does to the native thought of this country, to the native pulse of this country, to the native spirit of this country. That is the test. Therefore, your identity has always been live and let live, please don't impose. Therefore, anyone who approaches this country with an idea of conquest, either from the standpoint of religion or from the standpoint of ideology, is necessarily going against the spirit of this land, and therefore needs to be stopped in his tracks before he entrenches himself in this country. That is the fundamental position.